Know who you are and where you live. Okay. So I'll just repeat that. We just did the roll call and the Pledge of Allegiance, and we're on item number 2, which is public comment. So this is only for matters that are not on the agenda. And today's agenda is relatively brief. 2 business items: options for filling a vacancy on the city council and the city council appointments. If anybody has any public comments, please come to the mic and let us know who you are, where you live. Okay, seeing none in the chamber, do we have any online, any hands raised?
It's working.
I am not seeing any hands raised.
Okay, great. So then we'll move on to item number 3, which is the approval. We have one consent item today. I'll just read it. It's adopting resolution 4523, a policy for entering into and renewing service agreements for on-call support. Would any council member like to pull that item for discussion? Okay, would any member in the audience like to pull that item for further discussion? Okay, seeing no objections, I'll entertain a motion to pass 3.1.
Motion to pass 3.1.
Second.
Okay, roll call, please.
I can take the roll, but you don't have to because you're all present in the chamber, Mr. Mayor.
Oh,
Okay.
You could just do it by calling for ayes and noes.
Okay, that is more efficient. So yeah, if let's say aye or no.
You should ask all in favor.
Okay, all in favor.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, I usually don't do it that way.
Well, this is a nice time where we're under the old rules and you're all present in the chamber now. So
And we'll just note for the record that the vote was unanimously in favor.
Great, thank you, Sky. Okay, so then let's move on to the business items number 4. So the first of which is the options for filling a vacancy on city council. As we all know, our last meeting on Wednesday, Councilmember Haroff announced his resignation, and he will be his last effective day is at the end of this month, June 30th. Could we please get a staff report?
I'm just going to make a few opening comments and then Mr. Woodruff will take it and take you through the different dynamics in play. I want to thank the council for calling this special meeting, getting all 7 of us, which are 6 of us, which are critical to having this discussion in the room together. In the summer can be a little bit challenging because you've canceled the July 5 meeting because it's proximity of the holiday. One of the options you're going to hear about this today has a July 16 deadline, and your next regular meeting is July 19. So it is important that we have this discussion about options today. So with that, I'm going to turn to Mr. Woodruff, and he will walk you through the information in the staff report and lay out the direction that staff's seeking today.
All right, thank you. So state law provides a process that must be followed when a vacancy occurs on a city council. And in this case, there are some differences in the rules between when the vacancy occurs in the first half of a term and when it occurs in the second half. Since we are in the first half of Councilmember Haroff's current term, I'm just going to refer to those rules. The state law requires that the city council take one of 2 actions to fill the vacancy within 60 days of the date that the vacancy occurs. As Councilmember Haroff stated in his resignation letter, and as the mayor just stated, his last day will be June 30th. So the 60th day will be August 29th. So any of the options that I'm about to outline, council must take action by that date. There are 2 basic choices that the city council has. One is to fill it by appointment. If the council chooses to fill the vacancy by appointment, the person appointed would hold office basically until the results of the November 2024 regular municipal election. So this coming general municipal election, there would normally be 2 council seats on that ballot. And if you appointed somebody to fill this vacancy, there would be a 3rd, and that 3rd office would be for a 2-year term rather than a 4-year term. The other option that the city council has is to call a special election to fill the vacancy. And this is where the July 16 issue arises. if the council chooses to fill the vacancy by election, the election must occur on the next established election date that is more than 114 days after the council orders the election. The established election dates are set by the elections code. For the purposes of this discussion, those are this coming November's election and then the March 2024 primary election. So the 114th day from the November election date is July 16th. So if council wants to fill the vacancy by a special election and wants that to occur in November, you must call that election before July 16th. If you prefer the March deadline, the March election, then you must act between July 16th and August 29th. There is also an option that's available to council, which is to call a special election and make an interim appointment. But in order to make the interim appointment, you must have adopted an ordinance that authorizes you to do so. The city council has not done that in the past. It can be done by an urgency ordinance. So if that was something that council wanted to do, we could bring forward an urgency ordinance that could be adopted at a special meeting at any time that a quorum of council could be scheduled to hold a meeting. So one additional thing that's outlined in the staff report that is a somewhat complicated and unfortunately ambiguous legal issue, but that I did want to bring to council's attention, is that the rules in state law related to filling vacancies state that a majority of members of the council may not hold office as a result of having been appointed. As you know, Mayor Paulson and Vice Mayor Kandel were both nominated, went through the standard process for being candidates for office in 2020. But because they were the only candidates, state law in the elections code allows the city council to cancel the election and appoint them. There is no case law. There is no attorney general's opinion. There is basically no guidance from any authority to help us reconcile and understand whether or not council members who are appointed in lieu of an election constitute having been appointed for the purposes of this process for filling vacancies. As I discussed last year, actually, the city of Mill Valley went through a very similar situation. They identified a case that they thought strongly suggested that council members appointed in lieu of an election should be treated as appointed for the purposes of filling vacancies. I think that it's a very reasonable position, but I did not find it conclusive on this issue. So I think that that council can consider the option of appointment still, but should understand that there are some risks associated with that. Somebody could file an action in court to attempt to prevent you from making the appointment. Once the person is appointed, there is also a process that uses an unfortunate Latin term, quo warranto, that is available where you have to go to the attorney general and get permission to sue. And the basic nature of the case is a claim that the person is holding office illegally. And then they would have to once they had permission from the attorney general's office, they could then file the action in court. Those would be the two potential remedies if somebody believed that the appointment was improper. But I also point out in the staff report that there is this principle in California law called de facto official, which means that even if it is later determined that somebody who was appointed was not holding office properly, there would be no real basis to challenge any actions that the council took during the time that that person held office. They are treated as having properly held office until a court adjudicates the issue. So as city manager outlined, we scheduled the special meeting obviously at an unusual time and on an unusual day, but really just to have this preliminary conversation because council should start the discussion about what option you want, because then we will need some time to prepare things. and said if, for example, you do want to make an appointment, we would, a typical process, although not a mandatory one, would be to publicize the vacancy, accept applications, and then for the council to interview applicants to do that. And obviously, the sooner we can get started on that process, particularly with the July 4th holidays sort coming so soon, we wanted to have this discussion as soon as possible so that on the staff side, we'd be able to get wheels in motion to take any of the actions that council might be interested in. I think I've covered most of the major points. Obviously, I expect you have many questions, so I will stop there and turn it back to the council.
Great. Thank you, Sky, for that report. Let's bring it back to the council for discussion.
A few questions, Sky.
go ahead.
And option number 3, the interim appointment and then decision to hold a special election. That interim appointment scheduled time, would that be a 2 to 3 month process? Because you'd have to solicit, is there a length of time in which applications have to be solicited and then the interview take place?
There's no process in state, there's no mandatory process in state law for making an appointment either to fill out the next 2 years or on an interim basis. It is common for councils to publicize, accept applications, do interviews. It is not mandatory. There are instances in which city councils have among themselves proposed potential candidates, had a discussion about it, and made an appointment. So just to fill out the discussion about the interim appointment, if you scheduled an election, and even if it was November,
Yeah.
you wanted to have somebody filling the 5th seat until really what's going to end up being late November, early December, when the election results are certified and somebody can be sworn into office, you could do the process. There are no timelines associated with it. So if you said, give everybody a week to submit an application, we'll interview them in week 3 and make an appointment, that would be fine. But you could also, as I said, circulate potential names yourselves and have a discussion about it and make an appointment without having any kind of.
So we could set the
interview process.
timeline because it is the summer months, which are obviously a very unusual scheduling time for everyone in this county.
Yes.
My second part about that is there a process that the Department of Elections has to get involved in to certify that applicant is actually a resident of our jurisdiction, like we have to do when you're running for election?
So we would, part of the process for both, so either as part of the application process, we would have on the application, are you a registered voter? Or are you eligible to become registered if you're not registered? And then they would have to be registered before being sworn in. If the council wanted to discuss and propose names yourselves, before the swearing in, we'd have to have Allison work with the county registrar to verify that the person is either is registered to vote, because that is one of the qualifications.
And then that excludes non-US citizens.
It does.
Okay. Who are not registered to vote. I had several people ask me who are Canadian citizens, who are actually Canadian citizens.
So as you're sort of alluding to run for council, you must be a registered voter at the time of submitting nomination papers. There's I believe there are some cases that suggest that as long as somebody is eligible to vote and is registered by the time they take office, that's adequate. And so I'm sort of analogizing to that. But at the end of the day, if somebody is not eligible to register to vote in the United States, then they can't hold a city council office. It's a basic qualification.
So, and then my last question, if we choose option to leave the number 2, which is to hold a special election, but to leave this seat vacant for a period of time until the election is finalized, what are there implications for what content then? I guess we would still have a quorum of 3 out of 4, but is there state law that limits the type of ordinances that can be passed during that period of time? Let's say housing elements or anything that are crucial that need to have a full 5-member council, if that's our rule.
You should assume that while there are some narrow exceptions, you should assume that any ordinances and any resolutions that you adopt would require 3 votes.
Okay.
So there would be situations in which a 2-2 vote would result in an action not occurring. And what typically happens is if if those are things that the city must act on, then the city simply waits until the fifth council member is sworn in and then brings those back to be reconsidered at that time.
Okay, because we've been dealing obviously with some very important topics in the last 9 months. So,
That's correct.
all right, thanks.
Great. Any other comments? Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
First, thanks for that summary. Appreciate it. Question is, you started out saying we have 60 days kind of to choose a path, how we want to go down. Is there a deadline of when that path must be completed? If we choose to appoint somebody, do they have to be appointed by a certain date?
That is the 60 days is the deadline to take action. Either somebody must be appointed or you must have ordered the election.
Got it. Okay. And then as far as the election goes, is there a deadline if we want to do either the November 23 or March 24 or even the November 24? Is there something requiring us to do one or the other?
So that is sort of, I'm trying to figure out how to sort of work backward and re-articulate this. All the elections code says is that if you choose to fill the vacancy by an election, the election must be on an established election date, and it must be the next election date that is more than 114 days after you order the election. So if you take that action before July 16th, it will be a November election. If you take that action after July 16th, it will be the March election.
Okay.
That's sort of it.
That's perfect. And then my next question is, and Dan, this may be to you, as far as costs go, do we have any ballpark what the cost would be if it's a March election versus November election?
Yeah, actually, we got those recently because you had asked about potential initiatives, and it's the same cost. So if you call the election for one of the dates where there's already a significant election occurring, so that presidential primary or the presidential election, those are in 24. Those ballots are going to be very crowded. Your costs will be much lower. We anticipate they'd be around $15,000, maybe even a little lower than that. If you call for a November 23 election, it'll be more around 60,000 because you may be the only thing on the ballot. I've heard a little bit about one or two agencies considering going on the ballot, but as of right now, there actually is no local November 23 matter. So you'd be bearing more of the cost for that election.
Thank you. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Can I just do one follow-up to that one that Scott had was, if we decide for a November election, special election, if I recall, there's deadlines for those candidates that are in August. Like, so they would have to do the regular cycle of filing their candidate statement and everything per the election cycle. So that would be mid-August.
It would be, yes, it would be very short.
That's coming up.
It would be
Yeah,
very short turnaround time for relative to the normal cycle. That's correct.
right. Okay.
Kevin?
If it was the November 23, would that be just be a mail only ballot?
It would,
My understanding is no, that it wouldn't be a mail only ballot because the registrar slates November of 23 as still a election where there'd be some polling places.
Okay.
I think that's one of the other reasons the costs are higher.
Right.
I don't have it in front of me. I do have the mail dates, but I think we had given them to Mr. Woodruff and he had pointed out they're after the March election. So you really would need to call November or March. for
yeah.
your-
So, yeah, so the November election would not be truly mail only, which is a special category in the elections code. It would, I believe it would follow sort of our new post 2020 rules, which is
Yeah.
everybody would get mailed a ballot, but polling places would be available.
Would be.
The elections code defines 2 dates in the year as the established mail ballot only election dates, and those are August and May. So, and it's, since this election has to occur more than 114 days after you order the election, the August date is already too late.
Right.
So if you did it, it would have to be, if you wanted to do it on a mail ballot election date, it would be May, but May is even if you wait until the 60th day, the May date is too far out to be available.
Okay, so that clarifies that. Thank you. The other question I really have is, how do we handle? There seems to be a potential legal jeopardy for us as a council to proceed with an appointment. How about the appointee? How do we handle making them aware of those potential conflicts? I mean, I assume just morally, we have an obligation to say, hey, we're going to appoint you, but these are potential liabilities that might be coming your way. And are they protected individually? Because we're acting as a government body. Do we have immunity? Any resulting lawsuits? We're dealing with one particularly contentious issue right now that I strongly suspect either side might come after us. So how do we handle that aspect of it?
City manager may have some additional thoughts on practically how to do it. I would think I agree with you that if you wanted to make an appointment, it would be appropriate to notify applicants of this issue and at a minimum provide them with the staff report so they can understand the basic issue. There's no personal financial liability for any of this. If somebody were appointed and the type of action that I described where somebody attempted to remove them from office were filed, there would be no financial liability to them from doing it. There's no fraud or other potential criminality at issue here. It would simply be the resolution of a legal question that is currently ambiguous. It is typical, or I shouldn't say typical, it's very common in situations like this for the city council to authorize the city providing a defense to the member whose holding of office is being challenged. It's not required though, but it is common. And then there is also the sort of non-financial risk of the embarrassment of being accused of holding office improperly. And in some communities that does turn into an issue where the person comes under attack during public comments during meetings and is the recipient of mail telling them that they really should resign. So somebody would have to be prepared for the reality of the possibility that if such a movement arose, they could be subjected to a fair amount of recrimination from some members of the public.
And also amount of time for things like depositions and court appearances that might be mandatory, et cetera.
That is also true.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Did you want to?
Well, two comments. One is, while that's all true, I think in all likelihood it would go through the Attorney General's office. And so I'm not sure it would necessarily end up in court because we would probably get an opinion from the Attorney General. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sky. And we would deal with whatever that opinion turned out to be. And frankly, if you don't make an appointment today, you may want to, at a future date, decide if you want to ask the Attorney General to render an opinion on this ambiguity in the law. The other thing I just wanted to maybe have Sky touch on is if you do make an appointment and someone challenges it, what are the implications for any votes that have occurred in the interim?
So to just one piece of that, so the process, the quo warranto process is somebody has to go to the Attorney General's office and get permission to file the litigation. The Attorney General does not issue an opinion as part of that. If they grant permission, though, they obviously think that there's enough of an issue there that the courts should resolve it. So it would be possible for if we reached that stage and the Attorney General did grant that permission, that at that point, the person holding office might want to consider resigning to avoid the litigation process. But it wouldn't be mandatory because again, the issue is something that has to be resolved by the courts. Under the legal principle that I discussed that's referred to as de facto officer, any interim votes would very likely be considered to be valid because anybody who is de facto holding office is considered to be eligible to exercise the powers of that office until there's an adjudication that they were not holding office, and then they have to leave office. But anything that happens in the interim is considered to be valid, except under narrow circumstances where a court might determine that some individual actions were improperly taken, but those usually are sort of in the realm of fraud.
Could we ask for an attorney general opinion to start with?
So I have not researched this individually, but the same question came up in Mill Valley's case. The city attorney there did research it and concluded that that it would be something that the county council would have to ask for. And it's unlikely that the attorney general's office would issue an opinion within enough time to be relevant here. I mean, I think we have a little bit more time than they did when the question came up, but you're basically asking them to issue an opinion within 30 days, and they don't typically do that that quickly.
But would it cover our ass a little better if we started asking now, is I guess my point. Realizing they may not get us an answer in time, but at least we're doing our due diligence to try to stay within.
I could contact the county council's office and ask them, just as the Mill Valley city attorney did. I don't know about they have discretion about whether or not to ask for the opinion. So they don't have any obligation to do so just because we ask, and they may be unwilling to do so when they also don't think that we're likely to get an opinion back in enough time. I mean, I said 30 days because that would leave us enough time for you to still make a decision. The reality is it would take months. So you really would have to act without knowing the answer to the question from the attorney general.
But wouldn't it look better if there was a litigation down the road that we upfront asked the question?
It would not help us if the opinion was contrary to the action that you took.
But if it was positive, it would.
If it was positive, the courts treat attorney general's opinions as providing significant persuasive authority, but they are not dispositive or precedential.
Okay,
I
got it.
I just wanted to add, I partly brought that up because obviously Mill Valley had this scenario. We're now having this scenario. And certainly in my time in Larkspur, I can think of numerous elections where the councils, the number of candidates and the number of seats were the same. So the councils canceled the election. So I think Marin, as a community, may want to ask the county council to pursue this because it will probably happen again to somebody else at some point.
Yeah, I pulled the old report and for the agenda item back from, what is it, August of 2019, and we were going to save $80,000, which I would have gone along with that. I would have viewed it as a prudent decision, at that time, but now it's coming back to bite us. Thanks. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to share a couple thoughts before we go to the public. One is my overriding reaction to this is we want to maximize public trust. I think the technicalities are important, but as other council members have mentioned, this has been a year of big decisions, and it's been a year of a lot of split decisions. And I think that our first job here is to protect the public, and I think right along that is to maintain trust with the public. What I see are, some of the trade-offs. Can we conduct business? Can we maximize public input? Do the candidates have enough time to prepare and so forth? But, and this is also, unfortunately, like this whole year, everything seems to be under rapid fire and deadlines. So I don't want us to make a rush decision, but clearly we have some deadlines, the most looming of which is probably our ability to get something on the November 7th, 2023 election. If that were the option that we chose, we'd either have to make a decision today or we'd have to hold another special meeting before that deadline of July 16th. And I know this council loves special meetings and we've had so many, so that could still be an option. But just with those thoughts, I'd love to hear from the public. So I'll turn it over for public comment.
You're interim. Joan Lundstrom, Larkspur, longtime resident. I wrote a letter to the council proposing an interim appointment, and that was before the staff report and the looking at the Mill Valley experience. This is super tough because of the timing of the resignation. Put suddenly all these deadlines for which decision you'd make, whether it's appointment or special election, then special election when. The bottom line is, what's in the best interest of the city? And that is really tough because as was pointed out, and I during the questions to Sky, I wrote down 2-2. You'd be, if you had some of these decisions now right before you and didn't have a third person and had a vacancy, 2-2 means no decision, as you're well aware. So Councilmember Carroll's question about an appointment being a tiebreaker in one of that's another. As an appointment, that's a tough one. Then you're faced with the cost of special elections in March versus going for it now, and it now being November of this year, which in the best of all worlds, I would have liked to have seen an interim appointment of an ex-council member to hold the fort, to be there. But with the a special election being in November, you'd also give the public an opportunity to weigh in. The offset is that you'd have a vacancy until November. So maybe some things don't get decided for a while. The reasoning, the underlying reasoning, when you think about it from statutory government code, is they don't want the members of any council be all appointees, walk-ons. They want the public to be able to pick up a ballot and make choices. And that's the trust part. So while I don't don't think it's an easy option, I think a special election for November is the best option. Even though I'm very concerned about making sure that this special meeting was properly noticed in every way so that you don't get challenged on that. Because as I remember, the city clerk had to run down and put up notices within a certain hour. One used to be down at the Bonaire Shopping Center. The other used to be here at City Hall. So somebody doesn't come and say, this special meeting is not properly noticed. So I would just double check that. But given the situation, what's best for the city, I think the special election in November is. Thanks.
Thank you, Joan. Next comment, please.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Your city clerk, Allison Fallis, attested that this meeting was properly noticed.
Okay, yeah, let's note that for the record. So, okay, any other member in the chambers? Let's go to Zoom. Mr. Interim City Clerk.
I don't see any raised hands. Is there anyone in the Zoom audience that would like to speak? I'm seeing no raised hands, so I'm going to turn it back to you, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you. Okay, so bringing it back to the council, I guess we've had some of our questions answered. Are there any more questions or proposals or thoughts how to move forward? Mr.
I'd
Carroll?
just like to double check with Joan. You're referring to a November election. We were referring to this year or next year? This year. Okay. I just wanted to make
2023.
that clear.
Okay.
Well, I thank you for articulating that, Joan. I mean, we are in kind of a conundrum right now because we've been involved with some very serious and very compassionate issues in the last 9 months. Gabe, our mayor, has been guiding us quite well through that. But,
With
you
many
know,
special meetings.
that will be number one question that would be asked of an interim person is what are their positions on some of these crucial issues? And I think that will be very difficult to guide trust. Because we know we've had multiple meetings on rent control as an example, and that people are very familiar with where our positions are currently and where Councilmember Hoff's position was. So it sounds like we really, in my opinion, to get the most trust and involvement by the community is probably to have a special election in November. And most likely to leave this seat empty until that time. But I'd like to hear what everybody else has to think.
I had one quick question. As a kind of statistical concern, the November 2023 election participation versus the March 2024 election participation, do we have, this of course could change the fact that a lot of people are tuned into what's going on, but just what are the trends?
Well, there's a reason the report that Councilmember Carroll cited said there would be an $80,000 cost in a high participation election. And the registrar is suggesting $60,000 4 years later, because while the registrar's costs have gone up, the anticipation is a lower participation, and the way they calculate the cost is what they have to produce to make the election occur. So I think you can take that the registrar is assuming a lower participation rate in a November 23 election.
Yeah, I'll just add that since part of my practice is assisting government agencies where I'm not general counsel with elections matters, I'm not an expert, but I would my on the sidelines view on this would be that while this election would have a high level of visibility in November locally, a lot of people simply do not pay attention to elections unless there are multiple things being considered. And I think you could expect, just as the registrar does, that that the March primary, because it will be a presidential primary, would likely draw a lot more participation than November, even though I expect this election will have a high degree of visibility in Larkspur. It's just the case that people pay more attention when there are more things on the ballot. So March would probably see higher voter participation.
So maybe one thing I'd love to hear from staff. I believe, well, Ross has said they're doing the special election in November. At least, that's my understanding, because they have to authorize their public safety spending. If there any way to see what the proportional participation for an agency that's done special elections is relative to, like a presidential primary, secondary. I mean, that's not really critical. I'm gonna, in the back of my head,
sorry,
say,
Ms. Mayor, can you rephrase that?
Restate the
I'm getting a
question.
little lost.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I'm trying to find a ratio, that might be guidance, which would, be going to an agency that in the past has done a special election and has had a certain turnout, let's say 50%. And then in the presidential primary and, and the general election, they have something like 80%, that would give us some clue.
I guess we could take a little time to try to find that, but I want to also reiterate, March is a massive ballot. So you're gonna have a huge turnout. You've got the presidential primary, you've got the supervisorial race that involves a significant portion of our community. You probably have local, I've heard talk of several local measures going on the ballot from different agencies that cross into Larkspur's jurisdiction. It will be a very high profile, and in my experience here, turnout is very high in Larkspur in a high profile election.
I think, I mean, at a minimum, we could see what turnout was in the Mill Valley election versus their normal turnout. They ended up calling the election for March of this year. I don't know if anything else was on the ballot at that time. I assume probably not much. So for them, the March 2023 election would probably be relatively similar to a November election here. We could check voter turnout in that election relative to a normal city council election for them, just to see what the comparison looks like and provide that information to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, my assumption is exactly what the city manager just said, that, we would clearly get more turnout, but I'd like to quantify it. I mean, it would help, the public understand if we go in that direction. I just want to make one more observation before, I'd really like to hear from the other council members, is kind of on the pragmatic level. I'm thinking back to this entire year and even before, and I can't really think of any decisions that were not 4-1 or 5-0, except for rent control. So moving forward, the question is, the sort of option that I'm looking at, the two options I'm trying to weigh right now are special election November or special election in March. And, as a pragmatic consideration, do we have things that we're going to have to decide before November versus before March that could be controversial, because otherwise, if by precedent they've all been 4-1 or 5-0, it really doesn't matter if we have a fifth council member. So I mean, that was a lot to say, but I'm just trying to recollect, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong. I think the only really split vote was rent stabilization.
The moving to the library and community center and what to do with 400 Magnolia was also.
Okay,
split
that's
one,
right. That's
too.
right. That was okay.
And there's
Yeah.
also we don't know what might come from us on appeals from the planning commission.
Right.
Okay. Okay,
Which
good. So
those
that's helpful.
issues can be controversial.
Okay, so that is then a consideration, that there's quite a lot that might happen before November. I just wanted to clarify that. So anybody else? Yes, please, Councilmember Kendall.
Mr. Mayor, I agree with you that public trust is important and that we should have an election. And I think the question that you're asking is the right question. Should it be in March or should it be in November? I want to thank the council members because I think our council is very reasonable. And we discuss issues respectfully and we negotiate. And I have faith that the four of us would be able to function, whether it be through November or through March. I'm not concerned that without a fifth person, we're going to be deadlocked on everything. And I feel comfortable that we'll be able to do our job. So if there's going to be a greater turnout in March and we're going to get better representation from our community, that's probably where I'm leaning right now. And that's my logic why.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember.
But that actually, I mean, if
Right.
we do March, that person isn't actually seated till at least 30 days post-March. So that's push that out even 30 to 45 days when the election will be certified. A large ballot is often a longer period of time for certification. I can see that, but that's 6 more months more than November, which is a long time to have an unfilled seat, in my opinion. So even though we have turnout maybe a little bit lower, if it was in November, I think I've already heard 5 or 6 people who are interested in this interim position. So we might have a robust opportunity for conversation and debate with those individuals at least.
Councilmember Carroll, you look like you're queued up with lots of thoughts.
I would prefer an interim appointment. Just in fairness to, it's that comment that came up a while ago about the unknown knowns or the known unknowns and all that nonsense. And we just don't know what issues are going to come up between now and November or now and next April. But if I was considering putting an application in for an interim appointment, our previous discussion would give me pause. Because while I might be willing to suffer the outrages and indignities of sitting up on this dais and being stopped in the produce market and questioned about why is my neighbor's fence 4 inches higher than the code says that should be allowed. It's a whole nother thing to have to sit through a deposition by a battery of lawyers and possibly, you know, be ordered to a court date that might interfere with my life, you know. And so I would think twice about it. So I would cautiously proceed with an appointment, but shoot for the March election is my gut feeling at this point. Because I think we are going to have a full ballot for that. I think either the tenant organizations are probably going to want something on the ballot. And I think the landlord-backed organizations might have something that they're going to want on the ballot. So it could be a very exciting election next March, quite frankly. Not just a Republican bloodbath that might happen. So right now, that's my feeling. I would like to see the potential candidates that would want to fill in. A couple of the names that have been forwarded to me are all very acceptable, responsible people that I think would add value to our discussions, and particularly the former council members who have the history of Larkspur behind them and the values I would find comfort with. So that's really where I stand, is I think proceeding with an appointment and shooting for a March ballot.
Thank you. Councilmember Way.
Well, I think March is too far out. That's 10 months. Because by March and then the 30 to 45 day certification, I think we can't wait until 10 months from now to leave a seat unfilled. And I'm pretty sure that in interim position, it will be very difficult to get someone who is not well versed in some of our controversies and already has formed an opinion. So I'm more in favor of having a special election in November and getting that going right away and advertising it right away and getting a lot of candidates set up for August, and we'll be there. And we can support as much robust turnout as possible, but I think 10 months is too long to wait, which would be March.
Thank you. I mean, one other, I wanted to tag on to those comments. One other trade-off and risk we haven't really talked about is the level of experience. You know, Councilmember Carroll, you're pretty unusual. So when you were elected in, you and I went to Sacramento and you did your training and so forth. But, you know, I didn't feel like I had much to offer. I mean, you'd been on a school board, you've been following politics. You probably know a hell of a lot more than I do about a lot of things. So but, you know, my concern is we have no idea, you know, if someone is new, it may be the public's choice, but, you know, I think all of our experiences, it takes a while to really, you know, be on board. So even if someone were brand new and elected in November, you know, I mean, that's not ours to decide, you know, that's what the voters can decide, you know, if they think experience is important or not. But I as a pragmatic concern, that crosses my mind. To your point, Councilmember Way, I do think that is a long time to wait. But I just, you know, it's really a trade-off, you know, really a trade-off between, so I mean, I was leaning with the other 3 council members, I think the March election and what may make sense, you know, and if we don't have to decide on the November election now, we don't need another special meeting and we can bring this up at the next city council. But if we're seriously entertaining what you're saying, that has to be decided today, or at least before we meet again at the next regular meeting. And on that note, you know, I'm just really concerned about the turnout, and it's, to me, the 3 tiers are an appointment seems to be the least with the public's input. You know, November seems to be with more public input, and March is with the maximum public input that we could expect. And in my, you know, sort of prioritization of trust building for the community, that's what makes me lean towards March. And I'm back to what would happen practically. I think you're absolutely right. Issues could come up and we don't know, but we may just line up a series of 2-2 votes. And then the real question becomes, if it's like the library and it's RFPs and we really need to know for public works, is that going to hurt us? Is that hurt business? And at that point, could we make an appointment? Like if we ran into a series of 2-2s, or whatever, we could say, look, we've got 2 or 3, we just can't wait anymore. So by putting it on the March election, we could say, well, here we are in August and we're going to appoint someone now, and let's explain to the public, we need to get our RFPs decided. We need to get this and this done. And we do want to go with someone experienced, someone that the public trusts with full vetting process. So I'm wondering if that allows us to meet both your concerns and also maximize the turnout and the ability for deliberation on the public side. Councilmember Candell.
Thanks. So from my perspective, my biggest concern is an appointment. I think that would be a mistake. And the reason I think that would be a mistake is only because we are each going to want to appoint somebody whose values reflect our own. And not necessarily reflect the public's values, but our own values. And I think we're going to move the council one direction or another based on what we want to do. I mean, I think that's just human nature. And I just don't think that's in the public's interest. So that's my first concern, whether it's March or November, they both have very valid reasoning, and while in my own opinion, I think getting more public participation is probably worth the extra months that it's going to take. But I don't feel really strongly about it. I mean, I feel that it's important that we all agree, and I'm flexible on that. But I feel less flexible on the appointment part because I just don't think would be the right thing to do.
Can I throw another wrinkle in there? We did, in the November election, we had to have 4 candidates. There were 3 positions, but we did have 4 candidates. Is there precedent to bring that 4th candidate if they should be interested in to serve an interim period of time? I don't know. I don't even know if the 4th candidate who didn't win has an interest, but they're.
I think this is all, word of mouth, or did it happen in your community kind of thing? I think I at least recall some conversation about that idea. But I couldn't say with certainty that it's been done.
I think my concern with that would be taking someone who the public already said they don't want to be. So it's kind of right. So I'm not sure that would be the best move.
Yeah, and I'd add to that. I mean, that really is in the appointment category, which concerns you. And then we know that, the positions were articulate. They're I think it gets into the area where we have the most split votes. So I would not be in favor of that. But I think it's, it's something that crossed my mind as well.
I think Dan has something.
Oh, yeah, a council member. I mean, sorry.
Interim
Assistant city manager.
Yeah. If I've read this correctly, I've been going through the registrar's info. It looks to me like the participation was nearly double in the contested Mill Valley election versus the special election. So it was around 34-35% in the special election, and it was slightly over 70% in the contested election. So the wrinkle here is, if you do have it on March, it is going to be the only Larkspur thing. It's not going to be in November of 24 when there will also be other council seats up.
Yeah. So Councilmember Way, I'm wondering, I mean, I think you raised a really good point, but I think we're generally in favor of having a special election. The date is the issue. If we did move towards something that's more March, because that number surprised me. I thought it was maybe 70%, but that's a 100% difference in turnout. And I think that's significant. I think, for the public to really say, oh, I didn't know about this. And it's formally, there's not a problem, but as a matter of buy-in and stakeholder trust, I think it could be a problem.
But on the other hand, we have had meetings in this last 9 months where hundreds of people have showed up either on Zoom or here, and they're very engaged with our conversations that have been going on about rent control and other things. So we do have we're in a position now where we have a lot of engagement by community. And just even on Wednesday, there were, I don't know, 75 people on the Zoom call listening in our conversation. So I think there are people who are paying attention to what's going on and would be more interested in turning out because of these issues we've been dealing with, the North Magnolia Village project, which brought a lot of controversy and a lot of people paying attention. So I don't know. I mean, I really feel like 10 months is too long to leave a seat vacant if we have an option to make it less than that.
And with the possibility of, let's say we did say March election and, things are running smoothly for July, and then in August, we start having a lot of, debate and split votes. Considering an appointment then as a backup, would that?
I don't know if that we can, I don't think Sky's weighed in of whether that timing is appropriate.
Yeah, so if, state law doesn't have an answer for us about this question. It assumes that you will either call an election and leave the position vacant until the election occurs with the subvariant of an interim appointment that would also be made within the 60-day period, or that you would make an appointment. So what I would say is, in the absence of, but by the same token, it's not strictly prohibited either. So I guess if I were to just sort of spin out a little bit of the analysis, it's not prohibited. The council could adopt an ordinance that expressly says we not only can we make an interim appointment, we can if we have called an election to fill the vacancy, then we can also make an interim appointment after the 60-day period. Since there's no law that is self-enforcing that precludes you from doing that, somebody would have to bring a challenge to either prevent you from adopting that ordinance or from making the interim appointment, or again, to bring an action to have that person removed from office because they're holding it improperly. So I will say my view on this is that another way to look at it is you have satisfied state law. If you call a special election, you have satisfied state law. You've said the long-term option that we have selected is to call an election. At that point, the law doesn't expressly say anything about also doing an interim appointment after the 60th day. And I think there's a good argument that you have that discretion, but it is something that is not answered.
Yeah, and I guess I see two problems. One is that it's not answered, and the second is that it just occurred to me, if we make that appointment, that's precisely where we want the most public buy-in and transparency. So it may move some decisions along, but we don't know which. Like if it's the library, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be doing that. So anyway, it looks like you had a couple, Councilmember.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I
Kendall.
just wanted to first just respond to Councilmember Way. While I agree with you that we have had increased public participation, I think the amount of participation is still a fraction of the number of people that would come out in a March election. When we have a city with the number of people we have, yes, we have. I'm concerned with politics with the squeaky wheel theory that you get 50 people who are very vocal. We get the illusion that the city wants this when really it's just, those people. And my concern is those are the people that would come out in the November election, while it wouldn't be a broad representation of our community. But having said that, if I could, I wanted to ask Councilmember Carroll your thoughts on the November March election, if you had a preference and what you felt about that.
I shared the concern. I would rather the appointment be filled by the public than us. And so that the November 23 appeals to me, you know, in that respect. I agree with you, but I just, the problem is the time frame. I know so many people here in Marin pretty much are going to check out July and August. They go to Tahoe, Hawaii, you know, wherever, Europe, and a lot of people are traveling this year who haven't for the last 3 years, is my personal experience. I'm hearing from customers I haven't heard from in 4 years, and everybody wants to travel everywhere. And so that concerns me that they're gone. You know, this is unplanned, unexpected. I guess that's why I was saying earlier, I would like to see how many people would apply for an interim appointment, knowing the caveats that we've laid out, the city attorney has laid out as potential liabilities. I'm not going to have a litmus test on specific issues, and I'll be upfront about rent control. I don't necessarily, I'm not going to rule somebody out because they're not in favor of rent control. My overriding concern will be, if we do an interim appointment, is their knowledge of how we operate, how our departments operate. You know, I had the advantage that I attended all the meetings for 3 years in a row, which is unusual, and that says something about me psychologically that I may not want to really examine, and that I haven't seen anybody else doing that since I've been on the council, who, you know, they show up for a specific issue and nothing else.
James
Is
Holmes.
what I see. Well, yeah, no, except for James Holmes. I will grant that. And so that concerns me is, I have an overriding concern for good government and good policy, you know, that they learn the rope, you know, learning the ropes of, you know, sending a copy of an email to Dan when you're responding to somebody's complaint, to make sure you're doing everything right. That's a big part of this job. And so I tend to favor a former council person who has the knowledge and experience to do all this. And I think the greater participation in March does move me. You know, I try to think of the big issues we're going to be facing coming up, and all that, but generally, you know, June is our big month, and so the March election would have solved that issue for the budgets and the capital improvements and the other, you know, heavy lifting that we have to do in June. So I'd go with the majority of the council on this election on.
Well, I mean, we've debated it. I still think November would be a more responsible time to hold it. But if you all want to do March, then there's 3 to 1. See, that's what we're going to have going forward. I think the trust is a really important thing. And, but I do think that we have a lot of people who have been watching and are interested in participating as a council in an interim, as to fill the remaining part of Kevin's position. I've heard from several who are involved already in maybe the CAG, which for South Alicio, which is, they've been involved in the planning commission. They've been involved in other boards and commissions. So yeah, I think November is probably a better option for us, but if you all want to do March, then put it forward. I just think 10 months is too long to leave a seat empty. So.
Right, so it's a differential of 4 months, so it would be, I mean,
Yeah.
we're already 6 months no matter
Well,
what.
November, we could probably, since it's an
And then
only
it's
ballot, it
Christmas.
would get certified pretty quickly since it's only one thing. I would assume it would get certified quicker than a March ballot, which would probably be pretty big. And I know our certification for the times I've run takes at least 30 days. So, yeah.
But
So
one other factor is,
they could start the first weekend in the first meeting in December. Perfect.
But I would also point out, though, that generally our November and December calendars were pretty light because of the holidays.
Everything's,
So it's,
our calendar
know,
has been blown up this
yeah,
year.
but I know, but traditionally, over the last 3 years, as I recall, not much gets done in November and
Yeah.
December.
But I don't know.
So if we do it, that's 2 months of generally historically quiet. And so,
Who knows? We've had
it
more,
extends that timeline out a little more. to
we've
me.
had more special council meetings in this last year than we've ever had. So who knows?
Keep going for the
I'd like
record.
to introduce another possible.
Well, I know we're definitely going to have special council meetings for the new library and community center and the design of that and the RFPs for that. I mean, we're definitely going to be having crucial decisions to make in the fall, because we are timelined for a lot of things, it's not just rent control. We're also timelined for our contract with the state to get our library and community center built. And so we will be having special meetings to make some crucial decisions. So I don't know.
Can I
Yeah,
ask a question?
please.
And I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify. I know your preference was an appointment. I think probably the rest of the council is not leaning in that direction. So hypothetically, if we didn't do an appointment, would you still prefer March as opposed to November and keep the seat open? Or would you prefer to fill the seat earlier?
That's a tough one. If we decided not to do an appointment, that would push me to this November. Because I think the sooner the public, if we're not going to make the decision, then we have to rely on the public to make the decision.
Okay.
So I don't think it's, I don't think it's fair to the potential candidates to push it that quickly, but if it's a choice of one or the other, then I would prefer the public make the decision as opposed to us, but.
Okay. And one more observation is, I mean, we have, 2 people in the chamber and 4 or 3 on Zoom. And I don't know if going into July, if we get more participation, but, I think, Joan had mentioned earlier and others have said, this is a pretty important topic and people would like to say something. So you guys know me, I'm a big fan of special meetings, but I mean, if it's the decision has to be made today if we don't meet, again, before the 16th, or I'm sorry, before the 19th, whatever our next meeting is. I mean, I think the 3 options have been that, that seems to have the most consensus is that we simply act as a 4-member council until March, or we act as a 4-member council until November. And I don't think there's, and then the appointment piece, I was looking at, that as a backup. So we could make one of those decisions, have the backup, but I don't think there's.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt,
Yeah.
Mayor, but just wanted to make sure. Councilmember Wade does a great job of seeing when my hand goes up. I just conferred with Sky and I wanted to offer an option to the council. It sounds like you're gonna call a special election. So if you're going to call a special meeting before July 16, Sky can prepare the material to call a special election so that you can decide the date at that meeting. That would give you time to ruminate and hear from the community. And then at the special meeting with the material in front of you to call the special election, you can make your final decision about November, March. You can also do it today. I hear somebody saying, let's do it today. I just want to make sure you're aware you have that as an option. So.
Okay. Go ahead.
I have made my position clear, but in the spirit of being a 4-member council, my priority is not to appoint somebody.
Right.
And if everybody is willing to go along with that, I would be willing to abstain from the November versus March. And if the Councilmember Carroll felt strongly and Councilmember Wade felt strongly that they would rather do it in November, I'd be willing to go along with it.
Okay. So I'll put forward that I think we should leave this seat vacant and not appoint somebody and hold a special election to fill this position in November. So anybody Should I put that forward as a motion? Or is this, are we consensus?
Schedule
Ah.
special, sorry. I hope I'm not cutting you off. I think it's direction to us to schedule a special meeting before July 16,
Oh.
so that you have the material in front of you to consider calling that special election.
Okay.
So there's no way around the special meeting.
No, there's not if you want that November 23 date. Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to have that option, we have to have a special meeting before the 16th. If we hold the meeting and
We're on a swing.
if we hold that meeting and you have changed your minds, or some of you have changed your minds, then you can just take no action and we'll bring it back on the second regular meeting in July for the for the March election.
We're on a roll. This will be like our 14th special meeting.
Yeah. One option as you look at your calendars though is, I will not be available if but if Sky's available, we could restore your July 5th meeting for this single purpose. So I don't know if you're all around. On the 5th, but,
I'm available.
We've already submitted our vacation schedule for the summer, so.
I mean, I can make the 5th. I know.
I can make the 5th.
I can make the 5th.
I can make the 5th.
All right.
So it won't be a special meeting. We'll have a regular.
We'll have a regular meeting with presumably one item.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So then we aren't making a motion, but that's our decision. Is that sufficient direction?
I think we have direction to restore your regular meeting of July 5th. We'll prepare at least one item, which is consideration of calling a special election. I will leave the resolution blank, but if you choose to schedule it for November, we'll just fill that date in. If you want to wait until March, then you can take no action and we'll bring it back at the second meeting and you can take action at that time.
Is there a way to, so that we can start advertising what the deadline dates are for people who might be interested? Or put that in the staff report. So if we decide on November, then by August 15th, they need to submit or whatever date it is, submit a candidacy statement, et cetera. So people will have some pre-planning if they're really interested.
We could put some material up even as early as next week.
Okay.
To one, make people aware of the July 5th meeting and the discussion, but also what the registrar's deadlines would be.
Okay.
Yeah, and we can add in the staff report that if council schedules it for November, the deadline for filing nomination periods would be whatever that date is.
Right. Could get Allison really busy. It's good.
She'll get it right. If you leave it to me, who knows what'll happen.
Okay. So I feel like we could have done a vote tonight, but I feel good about the time primarily for public input. I mean, I think it is very consequential that the public, weigh in a little bit or as much as possible on that participation number. It could be huge. So, okay, if there's nothing else, then I think that brings us to the end of 4.1. And 4.2 is a separate item for city council appointments.
Yeah, just very briefly, we wanted to make sure you had a chance to look at the list of appointments and recognizing that Councilmember Haroff will no longer be available starting in July to serve in his committee assignments. All of his committee assignments have an alternate except one, which is a liaison role to the Ross Valley Sand District, which I don't know has been as pressing as it was in years past, when we were having some issues with the district that we were trying to work out. But so we are not in jeopardy of being unable to fulfill all our obligations to these various committees over the next month. But if you wanted to talk among yourselves now, and Mayor, the appointment power is yours, so you can start changing the list right now if you'd like to, or you can let the alternates just serve in those spots for right now and figure it out later.
Perfect. Yeah. Any thoughts? I mean, there are a fair number. I'm assuming you've all looked over the list. It's and I know we all have a lot of free time. So I don't know if anyone has a preference. Maybe we can just start
Horse trade.
horse trade. But yeah, I mean, the one I have is I was the alternate to MCE, and I feel very overloaded right now, but I know you all are too. So I'm happy to go whichever way. I mean, I've tried to keep up with that, but the police, the library, you were working on, and you had been doing library in the past.
Yeah. Tell you the truth, I didn't even look at the list.
Okay,
Can
I'll
you
pull it
bring
up for you. Yeah. Or do we have a
There was a hard
printed
copy
copy?
of it? No.
I could
didn't
print
bring my
some if you give me a
computer.
second.
We could probably, if we want to, stick to the alternates and then next meeting, when everybody's had a little bit better chance to look at it, kind of discuss it at the next meeting.
Okay,
If that makes
that's-
sense.
Police and fire.
Yeah,
'cause
there
you're
there
the-
won't be any, I don't think, there's just MC meeting next week. So I don't think there's much else between now and July 5th.
Is there? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, certainly not on police, and I wonder about library though.
There's nothing scheduled before
No,
July
okay,
5th for
no.
the.
Okay,
I
good.
think there's one planning commission, but I've been attending those.
Okay.
Anyway, so
Okay.
I'm happy to.
So between now and the next meeting, I think your point is you guys can take some time and
Yeah,
think
if
it over
we
and we can,
Switch
yeah,
around. 'cause
yeah,
we'll let you
I'm-
know.
absolutely. And I'm very open. I mean, I think we just want to, make sure things continue as they were before. So
Wasn't Kevin the ABAC representative too?
he already threw that one at me. Yeah.
Oh,
He threw a lot of things at me.
good, because I don't want it.
Okay. All right, so if there isn't anything else on 4.2, that brings us to the second 4, which I think should have been a 5, and that's adjournment. So the one correction is on our post that it said regular meeting, July 5th is canceled. Now that's no longer the case. It's uncanceled to everyone's great joy. And I look forward to seeing you all July 5th after our 4th holiday.
I do want a sign up over that door with
Yeah.
the previous record of meetings in any particular year. And in one of these flashing clocks that show the number of minutes we've met this year and the number of meetings.
Next to the national debt.
Do
Yeah.
do we assume that's a 6:30 regular start?
If that works for you, your regular meeting
Yeah.
can start as early as 6 o'clock.
Yeah, and my understanding is, I mean, this item was almost voted on. It's really just to give the time gap, vote that, and then it should be fairly short. Consent may be something, but yeah,
Not consent, but
no consent.
could be a short meeting.
For me, any window within the regular meeting time is fine. So,
6 o'clock.
so we can make it 6 o'clock as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that
Doesn't
works.
matter to the city manager.
Well,
I'm on vacation.
I know.
I'll be tearing down the Marin County Democratic booth at the fairgrounds. I don't think that'll take too long.
Okay, so with that, we're adjourned, and I'll see you guys on July 5th.